Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Please consider subscribing and check out our Patreon for more. Enjoy the video. The lecture hall buzzed with quiet chatter as students filed in, taking their seats and pulling out notebooks. At the back of the room, Paul slumped low in his chair, trying to make himself invisible. His eyes darted nervously to the door every few seconds, watching for her arrival. A flash of copper hair caught his attention. Paul's breath caught in his throat as Kathleen walked in, laughing at something her friend had said. She glided past his row, the scent of her perfume lingering in the air. Paul wanted desperately to say hello, to make some witty comment that would make her laugh. But as always, the words died on his lips. Earth to Paul. You in there, buddy? Paul startled as Jenny plopped into the seat next to him, Melinda close behind. He felt his cheeks flush, knowing he'd been caught staring. Oh, hi guys, he stammered. Didn't see you come in. Too busy making googly eyes at a certain redhead? Melinda teased, leaning across Jenny to whisper conspiratorially. Paul sank lower in his seat, wishing he could disappear entirely. I didn't. Jenny rolled her eyes good-naturedly. Oh, come on, Paul. We all know you've been crushing on Kathleen since freshman year. When are you going to work up the nerve to talk to her? I talk to her, Paul protested weakly. Mumbling, excuse me, when you bump into her in the hallway doesn't count, Melinda pointed out. Before Paul could formulate a response, the professor called the class to order. He breathed a sigh of relief, grateful for the reprieve from his friend's well-meaning but mortifying interrogation. As the lecture began, Paul tried to focus on taking notes, but his eyes kept drifting to Kathleen's silhouette a few rows ahead. The hour crawled by interminably. When class finally ended, Paul shoved his books in his bag, ready to make a hasty escape. But Jenny and Melinda were too quick for him. Not so fast, mister, Jenny said, linking her arm through his. We need to talk. About what? Paul asked warily as they steered him out of the classroom. About your crippling shyness and complete inability to talk to girls, Melinda replied bluntly. Paul winced. I'm not that bad. Yesterday, you tripped over your own feet, trying to avoid making eye contact with the barista at the coffee shop, Jenny reminded him. She was intimidatingly pretty, Paul mumbled. They're all intimidatingly pretty to you, Melinda said with an exasperated sigh. Which is why we've decided to take matters into our own hands. A thrill of alarm shot through Paul. What does that mean? It means, Jenny said as they exited the building into the bright autumn sunshine, that you're coming over to my place tonight for an intervention. I don't need an intervention, Paul protested. I'm perfectly happy being shy and awkward and alone forever. See, that right there is why you need an intervention, Melinda said, poking him in the chest. No friend of ours is going to die sad and alone if we can help it. We promise it'll be painless, Jenny assured him. Just a fun night in with your two best friends. What could go wrong? Paul groaned internally, knowing resistance was futile. Fine, but no makeovers or other embarrassing stunts, okay? Jenny and Melinda exchanged a look he couldn't quite interpret. Of course not, Jenny said smoothly. See you at 8? As his friends waved goodbye and headed off to their next classes, Paul couldn't shake the feeling he'd just agreed to something he was going to regret. The rest of the day passed in a blur of lectures and study sessions. By the time evening rolled around, Paul's anxiety had reached a fever pitch. He stood outside Jenny's apartment, hand poised to knock, debating whether he should just turn tail and run. Before he could make up his mind, the door swung open. Jenny beamed at him, already in comfy pajamas with her hair piled messily atop her head. You came, she exclaimed, pulling him into a hug. I half expected you to chicken out. I considered it, Paul admitted as she ushered him inside. The apartment was cozy and familiar, littered with the accumulated detritus of college life, textbooks, empty coffee mugs, and half-finished art projects. Melinda waved from her perch on the couch, a glass of wine already in hand. So, Paul said, sinking into an armchair. What exactly does this intervention entail? Well, Jenny began, settling onto the couch next to Melinda. We've been thinking about your situation. And we think we've figured out the root of the problem, Melinda chimed in. Paul raised an eyebrow. Which is, you don't understand girls, Jenny said bluntly. Paul blinked, taken aback. What do you mean? I understand girls fine. You two are my best friends. Yeah, but that's different, Melinda argued. You've known us forever. We're practically like sisters to you. But when it comes to girls you're attracted to, you freeze up. Because you put them on this pedestal, Jenny continued. You see them as these mystical, unknowable creatures instead of just people. Paul opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. They weren't entirely wrong. So, what's your solution? He asked warily. Jenny and Melinda exchanged another of those looks that made Paul nervous. We think, Jenny said slowly, that the best way for you to understand girls is to become one. Paul stared at them blankly for a long moment. I'm sorry, what? Just for tonight, Melinda hastened to add. We want to give you a makeover. Do your hair and makeup, put you in a cute outfit, let you experience what it's like to be a girl for a few hours. Paul leapt to his feet. Absolutely not. No way. Not happening. Oh, come on, Paul, Jenny cajoled. It'll be fun and educational. How is dressing in drag supposed to help me talk to Kathleen? Paul demanded. It's not about the clothes, Melinda explained patiently. It's about gaining a new perspective, seeing things from our side for once. Plus, Jenny added with a sly grin, nothing builds confidence like looking fabulous. Paul looked back and forth between his friends' eager faces, searching for some sign they were joking. Finding none, he slumped back into the chair with a groan. I can't believe I'm even considering this, he muttered. Is that a yes? Melinda asked hopefully. Paul took a deep breath, steeling himself. If I do this, and that's a big if, you have to swear on your lives that no one else will ever find out about it. Ever. Jenny and Melinda's faces lit up with identical grins. Cross our hearts, they chorused. All right then, Paul said, immediately regretting his decision. Let's get this over with. What followed was simultaneously the most mortifying and enlightening experience of Paul's young life. Jenny and Melinda attacked the makeover with gleeful enthusiasm, transforming their reluctant subject with expert precision. They started with his hair, using a combination of product and clever styling to give the illusion of longer, softer locks. Next came the makeup, an ordeal that left Paul with newfound respect for the daily effort many women put into their appearances. How do you not poke your eye out with that thing? He complained as Melinda wielded an eyeliner pencil with terrifying efficiency. Practice, she replied simply. Now hold still or I'll give you raccoon eyes. By the time they finished with his face, Paul hardly recognized his own reflection. His features seemed softer somehow, more delicate. His eyes looked huge and doe-like, framed by long lashes. Damn, Jenny said appreciatively. You make a pretty girl, Paul. Paul flushed, unsure how to respond to the compliment. Before he could dwell on it, they moved on to the next stage, clothing. I don't think any of our clothes are going to fit him, Melinda mused, eyeing Paul's lanky frame critically. Not a problem, Jenny said, disappearing into her room. She returned moments later with a garment bag. I borrowed some stuff from my sister. She's closer to Paul's size. Paul eyed the bag with trepidation. Do I want to know what's in there? Probably not, Jenny admitted cheerfully. But you're going to find out anyway. Strip? Paul balked. What, right here? Melinda rolled her eyes. We've seen you in swim trunks, doofus. This is no different. Now take off your clothes before we do it for you. Knowing they absolutely would follow through on that threat, Paul reluctantly began to undress. Jenny and Melinda turned their backs, giving him a modicum of privacy as he changed into the outfit they'd selected. The first challenge was the bra. Paul fumbled with the clasp for several moments before Melinda took pity on him and helped fasten it. The feeling of the padded cups against his chest was deeply strange. Next came a flowy blouse in a soft shade of blue, followed by a black skirt that fell just above his knees. Paul tugged at the hem self-consciously, unused to the feeling of cool air on his legs. "Almost done," Jenny assured him, kneeling to help him step into a pair of low heels. "How does that feel?"
"Wobbly,"
Paul replied honestly, teetering slightly as he tried to find his balance.
"How do you walk in these things?"
"Practice," Melinda said again. "Eventually, it becomes second nature." Finally, they added a few accessories, delicate silver jewelry and a spritz of floral perfume. Jenny stepped back, surveying their handiwork with a critical eye. Yes, we're done. Take a look." She spun Paul to face the full-length mirror on her closet door. For a long moment, he simply stared at his reflection in stunned silence. The person looking back at him was undeniably feminine. From the soft waves of his styled hair to the curve of his hips in the fitted skirt, every detail screamed girl. And yet, it was still unmistakably him. His own eyes gazed back from beneath the artfully applied makeup. "Well?" Melinda prompted. "What do you think?" Paul tilted his head, considering.
"It's weird," he said slowly. "But not in a bad way, I guess. I feel like I'm looking at my long-lost twin sister or something."
Jenny clapped her hands together excitedly. "That's perfect. That's exactly the perspective we wanted you to gain." "Okay," Paul said, tearing his eyes away from the mirror. "I admit this is pretty impressive, but I still don't see how it's supposed to help me talk to Kathleen." "That's because we're not done yet," Melinda replied with a mischievous grin. "Now comes the fun part." For the next few hours, Jenny and Melinda put Paul through what they called girl boot camp. They coached him on how to sit and walk in a more feminine manner. They gave him a crash course in makeup application and hairstyling. They quizzed him on typically girly topics like fashion and celebrity gossip. Through it all, Paul found himself oddly fascinated. He'd always considered himself a fairly sensitive, empathetic guy. But seeing the world through this new lens gave him an entirely different perspective on what it meant to be a woman.
"I had no idea how much work goes into all this,"
he admitted as Jenny demonstrated the intricacies of creating the perfect winged eyeliner. "That's kind of the point," Melinda said. "Guys often take for granted how much effort girls put into their appearances, not to mention all the other crap we have to deal with on a daily basis." They regaled Paul with stories of catcalling, mansplaining, and other microaggressions they'd experienced. Paul listened with growing horror and sympathy.
"I had no idea," he said softly. "I mean, I knew that stuff happened, but hearing about it firsthand. I'm so sorry you have to deal with all that."
Jenny squeezed his hand. "That right there? That empathy and understanding? That's why we wanted you to do this. You're already a good guy, Paul. We just wanted to help you see things from our perspective a little more clearly." As the night wore on, Paul found himself relaxing into the role. He giggled with his friends over silly YouTube videos. He let them paint his nails a shimmering shade of purple. He even worked up the courage to take a few selfies, marveling at how different he looked. By the time midnight rolled around, Paul felt like he'd gained a lifetime of insights. As Jenny and Melinda helped him remove the makeup and change back into his normal clothes, he felt a strange sense of loss. "So," Melinda said as Paul finger-combed his hair back into its usual style, "do you feel any differently about talking to Kathleen now?" Paul considered the question carefully.
Yeah, actually. I mean, I'm still nervous, but I feel like I understand her a little better now. Like, she's not this untouchable goddess, you know? She's just a person, same as me."
Jenny beamed at him. "That's exactly what we were hoping you'd realize." "Plus," Melinda added with a wink, "now you know all her beauty secrets. You could probably give her makeup tips if you wanted to." Paul laughed, shoving her playfully. "I think I'll leave the makeup artistry to you two. Thanks." As he prepared to leave, Paul surprised his friends by pulling them both into a tight hug. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "I know I complained a lot, but this actually meant a lot to me. You guys are the best friends a guy could ask for." Jenny and Melinda returned the hug fiercely. "We love you too, you big softy," Jenny teased. "Now go get some sleep. You've got a big day tomorrow." "I do?" Paul asked, confused. Melinda grinned. "Yep, because tomorrow is the day you're finally going to ask Kathleen out." Paul's stomach did a nervous flip, but for once, the idea didn't fill him with paralyzing dread. "You know what? I think you might be right." The next morning, Paul woke feeling strangely energized. As he got ready for class, he found himself paying more attention to his appearance than usual. He chose a shirt that brought out the green in his eyes, styled his hair with a bit more care. Looking in the mirror, he smiled at his reflection. "You've got this," he told himself firmly. The walk to campus felt different somehow. Paul found himself noticing things he'd overlooked before. The way women adjusted their clothing as they walked, the subtle ways they avoided eye contact with certain men on the street. He felt a new kinship with them, a silent understanding. As he entered the lecture hall, his eyes immediately sought out Kathleen. She was already in her usual seat, copper hair gleaming in the fluorescent lighting. Paul took a deep breath, steeling his nerves. "You can do this," he muttered under his breath. "She's just a person, a nice, funny, incredibly beautiful person. No pressure." Before he could talk himself out of it, Paul strode purposefully down the aisle. He paused by Kathleen's row, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure she must be able to hear it. Hi, Kathleen," he managed, his voice only shaking slightly. Kathleen looked up, surprise flickering across her features. "Oh, hi, Paul," she said with a warm smile. "What's up?" "I was wondering," Paul began, then faltered. He took another deep breath, channeling some of the confidence he'd felt the night before. "I was wondering if maybe you'd like to grab coffee sometime. With me, I mean, like a date?" Kathleen's eyebrows rose, but her smile didn't waver. "Wow, yeah, actually. That sounds nice." Paul blinked, certain he must have misheard. "Really? I mean, great! That's really great." Kathleen laughed softly, the sound making Paul's heart skip a beat. "How about after class? We could head to the campus coffee shop?" "Perfect," Paul agreed, unable to keep the grin off his face. "It's a date." As he made his way to his seat, Paul felt like he was floating. He caught Jenny and Melinda's eyes across the room. They gave him matching thumbs up, grinning proudly. When class finally ended, Paul's nerves returned in full force. He gathered his things slowly, watching as Kathleen packed up her bag. Taking a deep breath, he made his way down to her row. "Ready to go?" he asked, proud of how steady his voice sounded. Kathleen smiled up at him. "Definitely. I'm in desperate need of caffeine after that lecture." They fell into step together as they exited the building, an awkward silence stretching between them. Paul racked his brain for something clever to say, but all his carefully prepared conversation starters seemed to have deserted him. "So," Kathleen said finally, "I have to admit I was pretty surprised when you asked me out. I always got the impression you didn't like me very much." Paul stumbled, nearly tripping over his own feet. "What? No. I mean, why would you think that?" Kathleen shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. "You always seem to go out of your way to avoid talking to me. I figured I must have done something to offend you." "God, no," Paul said emphatically. "It's actually the opposite. I've had a crush on you since freshman year. I was just too nervous to say anything." As soon as the words left his mouth, Paul wanted to kick himself. Way to play it cool, he thought ruefully. But to his surprise, Kathleen didn't seem put off by his admission. Instead, she laughed, a genuine warm sound that made Paul's heart soar. "Well, aren't we a pair of idiots?" she said, shaking her head. "I've had a thing for you too. I kept trying to work up the nerve to talk to you, but you always ran off so quickly." Paul gaped at her, momentarily struck speechless.
Are you serious? As a heart attack, Kathleen confirmed with a grin. Guess we've both been pretty oblivious, huh? They reached the coffee shop, still chuckling over their mutual misunderstanding. As they waited in line, Paul felt the last of his nervousness melting away. This wasn't so different from hanging out with Jenny and Melinda, he realized. Kathleen was just a person. A funny, kind, incredibly attractive person, but still just human. So, he said as they claimed a small table by the window. Tell me something I don't know about you. Kathleen took a sip of her latte, considering. Okay, here's a weird one. I'm terrified of butterflies. Paul blinked. Butterflies? Really? I know, Kathleen said, laughing at his expression. Everyone always says they're so beautiful and delicate. But have you ever looked at one up close? They're like colorful little aliens with creepy body-snatching proboscises. Freaks me out. Paul found himself laughing along with her. I'll never look at butterflies the same way again. Okay, my turn. I secretly love terrible reality TV shows. The trashier, the better. Oh my God, me too, Kathleen exclaimed. What's your poison? Real Housewives? 90 Day Fiancé? Love Island, Paul admitted sheepishly. It's so gloriously stupid, I can't look away. They spent the next hour swapping embarrassing stories and discovering shared interests. Paul was amazed at how easy it felt, now that he'd gotten over his initial fear. Kathleen was funny and down-to-earth, nothing like the unattainable goddess he'd built up in his mind. As their coffee date drew to a close, Paul felt a pang of disappointment. He didn't want the afternoon to end. This was really nice, Kathleen said, echoing his thoughts. We should do it again sometime. Definitely, Paul agreed eagerly. Maybe dinner next time? There's this great little Thai place downtown I've been wanting to try. Kathleen's face lit up. I love Thai food. It's a date. They exchanged numbers and parted ways, both grinning like idiots. As Paul watched Kathleen disappear around the corner, he felt a surge of gratitude for his friends and their unorthodox intervention. He pulled out his phone, sending a quick group text to Jenny and Melinda. Mission accomplished. I owe you both big time. Their responses came almost immediately. Jenny, yes, details ASAP. Melinda, told you our plan would work. You can thank us by never making us watch you pine from afar again. Paul laughed, pocketing his phone as he headed back to his dorm. He had a lot to process, but one thing was certain. Life was about to get a whole lot more interesting. Over the next few weeks, Paul and Kathleen's relationship blossomed. They went on more dates, each one easier and more enjoyable than the last. Paul found himself opening up in ways he never had before, sharing hopes and fears he'd always kept buried. One night, as they walked hand in hand through the quiet campus, Kathleen turned to him with a curious expression. Can I ask you something? She said. What made you finally decide to ask me out that day? It seemed so out of the blue. Paul hesitated, debating how much to reveal. Well, he said slowly, let's just say I had a perspective-altering experience the night before. It helped me realize that I was letting my own insecurities hold me back. Kathleen raised an eyebrow. That sounds intriguing. Care to elaborate? For a moment, Paul considered deflecting. But as he looked into Kathleen's warm, understanding eyes, he made a decision. If this relationship was going to work, he needed to be honest, even about the embarrassing parts. Taking a deep breath, he launched into the story of his girl boot camp experience. To his relief, Kathleen didn't laugh or seem weirded out. Instead, she listened with rapt attention, asking thoughtful questions along the way. When he finished, Kathleen was quiet for a long moment. Then she surprised him by pulling him into a tight hug. Thank you for sharing that with me, she said softly. It means a lot that you trust me enough to be vulnerable like that. Paul returned the hug, marveling at how perfectly they fit together. Thanks for not thinking I'm a total weirdo, he murmured into her hair. Kathleen pulled back, her eyes twinkling with mischief. Oh, I definitely think you're a weirdo, she teased. But
That's okay. I like weird. Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out Patreon for a lot more content and early access to YouTube videos.